A white male, blonde hair, sports coat, and a blue tie with the face of a lion in the center sits in a recording studio. In the background, an analog clock. Pieces of paper with print are pinned to the wall. An oblong box labeled the Metropolitan Washington Ear has green and red buttons with a pair of headphones resting just in front, near a Washington Post newspaper.
My name is Rich Collins. I was born in Washington, D.C., and when they brought me home from the hospital, it was just about 2 miles from the studio here. 4 years later, we moved into Aspen Hill in Rockville, and then eventually into the city of Rockville. So I attended the University of Maryland, and my freshman year, when I was at College of William & Mary, I was a high jumper. In fact, I was a D.C. All-Metropolitan high jumper. The point is, I'm a competitive individual. Now, you should know this. You should know that I am a mortgage settlement agent. In 2009, I conducted a closing, and the gentleman told me that he reads for the blind. I slapped the table and I said, that's exactly what I want to do. Give me more information. So he gave me the contact information. The next week, I came into the studios for an audition. Because you see, they don't take just anyone off the street. They need to make sure that your voice is of right quality, that you know how to pronounce words correctly. And so I sat down and I read a few stories. I read a list of vocabulary words. So when I see the word egregious, I know how to pronounce it. When I see the word hors d'oeuvres, I know how to pronounce it. They then had me describe some cartoons, comics, and I was able to do that. A week later, they asked me to come in and read. So every Monday morning, I came in and I read articles that I had chosen out of the Washington Times newspaper. And eventually I got to the point where I was pretty good at doing it. And I asked the folks here if I could read from home because I know that was a possibility. I had demonstrated that I am reliable, I'm dependable. So they gave me a device which I'm able to hook up into my telephone so I can read the sports sections. I do read the sports section of the Washington Post on Mondays and Wednesdays. I get up, many times it's 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I call in to Stuart Brown, who happens to be the person who assigns the stories and the numbers. We go over the stories and their assigned numbers to make sure that we're on the same page, literally, and then I read the stories. Many times it takes me 2 hours to complete those stories. I then call back Stuart and said, okay, I just completed, and he wants to verify that the numbers I read are the numbers that he had assigned. I should mention that when I said I wanted to read for the blind, it's a great way to give back. I've got a voice, I can read, and I've got the time and the energy and the passion to do it. So for me, it's a gratifying endeavor. Candidly, I don't know how the people feel about what I'm doing. I am given some feedback from management here at the Ear, and they say people are receiving you rather well. I put in the time and the energy, and once again, it's just a gratifying feeling for me to know that I am performing a service that people appreciate. Incidentally, the device that has been provided to me by the Ear, it's a very simple thing. It's a matter of taking the telephone line, it's a landline, even though it's through the internet, and I just plug it into the device. There's nothing fancy. It's just my home office where I'm sitting at a desk, and I use my cell phone to read the stories that are written in the sports section of the Washington Post. You should be aware that there is a technique or numbering system, if you will. Stuart Brown, I call Stuart my handler. When I get started in the morning, I call Stuart up, and he will say, okay, Rich, these are your numbers that we're going to be assigning to the stories. Now, I read the sports section. The sports section always begins with the numbers 1-8. So 1801 is Inside Sports. Inside Sports is going to reference 2, maybe 3 stories that you'll find inside the sports section. And during the fall, during the football season, 1801 is also going to include the scores from the NFL. Now we move on to number 1802. If the Redskins have played a game the previous day, the first story is going to be 1802. There's usually a second story by a columnist associated with the Redskins game. That will be number 1803. Now, there might be a story on page 1 that has to do with the Washington Wizards. that would be number 1804. Maybe there's a story about the Lady Terps, and that would be 1805. Also, if there's photographs associated with these stories, I will describe what's in the photograph. We then move to the next page, and every story that's within the sports section has a number assigned to it. And it's important for us to know what these numbers are. So Stuart and I, or whoever the reader is, we are making sure that the numbers that we have assigned to the stories, that we're on the same page, literally. So I hope that gives a good idea or a good explanation as to, if you want to call it the technicalities behind what we do as a reader, I just described them. There's one thing that I take pride in, and that is that I never make a commitment unless I know I can fulfill it. Many times people will ask me, Rich, we need you to do this, that, or the other, and I will tell them, I hope you understand, I'm not going to commit to something that I can't fulfill. So when I decided to read for the Metropolitan Washington Ear, I committed every Monday morning to be there early in the morning to do the 2.5 hours of reading every week. And then within the last few months, I've been asked to do Wednesday mornings. Once again, every Wednesday morning, right along with Monday, I'm reading. Every now and then, I will know in advance that I'm not going to be available. I try to give as much advance notice as I can. On one occasion, I can recall, it was a 24-hour notice. That's not something I like to do, but unfortunately I had to do it. And I've been asked the question, well, what happens if you're sick early in the morning? I probably have my wife call in. Usually it's because my voice isn't working. If my voice is working, I'll be able to make the read. I've been asked to convey what type of feelings I have about the service that I'm providing. I can equate it to the same feeling I get when I go into a nursing home, when there are residents in there, and all I do is spend time with them and chat with them and try to rekindle their memories, and it's just an enjoyable feeling. So I do have the same sense that when I'm reading, I am providing, albeit a one-way conversation, I am conversing with people and hopefully providing them with enjoyment, because I am reading today's news today, and I'm using a human voice when I do that. I've recently been asked the question about what role, if any, will artificial intelligence play when it comes to reading the way we read. I can share this with you. I have listened to the Washington Post audio version of their stories that are being read, and they're perfect. I mean, the person has the opportunity, or if it's generated by a computer, those words are perfect. Except every now and then I notice that maybe they're not pronouncing egregious the way it should be. There have been times when I'm reading and I mispronounce a word. Sometimes I stop it and re-record. Other times I simply explain, oh, that should have been, or I say rather, and much like you might hear a radio broadcaster. And so to me, that is natural. That's a human voice. That's not something you typically get from artificial intelligence. When I am engaging in a conversation with someone, I prefer to speak to a human being as opposed to a robot. And I think that's what we're able to deliver when we're reading to the listeners of the Washington Ear. We are a human voice. We are delivering our humanity across the telephone lines to the people who are listening. And I think that's a value. A few years ago, I did take a hiatus, and the reason I did that was because I had started out a new venture, and I didn't have the time. As I mentioned earlier, when I make a commitment, I fulfill it. So because of my new venture, I didn't have the time to read. So after a number of years, I should say in the back of my mind, I knew that I wanted to get back to reading because I find it so enjoyable. And once I found that I did have the time, I reached out to the folks here at the Ear. And after a number of months, I finally get a phone call. And they said, Rich, would you like to begin reading again? Well, I jumped at the chance. Now, you might think it's like riding a bicycle. No, it was not. I did have to retrain. It was almost rehabilitation, so to speak, to learn how to do the techniques that I was doing. And in fact, I did come into the studio in order to retrain myself. And then once I got back up to speed again, things just fell back into place. And it didn't take me very long. It might have taken me 6 weeks, 7 weeks before I was back to where I was before I took my hiatus. By human nature, we all want to know, are we really doing a good job? Do people really, really like us? If you're a reader, don't expect that. In fact, there's a story about one reader who actually announced as she was reading that she wanted people, the listeners, to phone in or do something to let them know, let the ear know how she was doing. The response was a deafening 0. She was so heartbroken that nobody bothered to call in. People will not call in unless you forget to read the day's horoscope or Ann Landers. They will let you know if you did not deliver what they expect you to deliver. I'm going to share my opinion with the folks that are watching this, that when it comes to an organization like the Metropolitan Washington Ear, yes, it's a great service, but like everything in our lives, it takes money. Dollars are needed in order to do this. Now, yeah, there's some government plans, and you might hear that it's funded by the state of Maryland. Well, there are budgets, and we hear about legislators all the time looking on how to cut back the budgets. And in cases like that, it's necessary for the community to pitch in. And we all know about how the community strives to serve the disadvantaged. Well, there's a lot of folks out there, while they might not be able to read or they don't have the ability to hold the newspaper steady, they still are in need of help. And many times people are reluctant to go out and ask for help. So that's why we as a community must recognize how we can help. If we can read, great. Maybe we don't have the ability to read or make that time commitment, but we do have dollars that we can contribute so those that can read can perform that service. So that's my opinion. I've enjoyed sharing my experience with you. Now, if you would allow me, I'd like to get back to work. Monday headline, grounded and pounded. Daniels struggles and Commanders' defense crumbles late as Eagles take control of the NFC East race. This story is by Nikki Jabvala. Dateline, Philadelphia. Jaden Daniels sat on the bench wearing a burgundy cap, his right hand mangled and bleeding Thursday night, left ribs still bruised from a hit he suffered weeks earlier. Terry McLaurin, his star wide receiver on track for career highs, sat on the far end of the bench with a long gaze, not a single catch.